Chapter 2 Rachel. After all, Harper Samsa was the owner or part owner of this company, and he was rich and influential throughout the Bay Area. He can do whatever he wants, but he would be a little less intimidating wearing jeans, I thought. And a little less uptight. With powerful men, I heard they were wired that way. I had brothers and I was not afraid of a man, but Harper Samsa affected me beyond explanation. Turning to check my desk, I stacked up all the folders Ms. St. John had given, where I had to back up work that she had never completed or done. Now I knew why Winnie St. John chose me. The moment I met Harper's secretary, Winnie St. John, a woman in her 50s or early 60s, who obviously loved her job but didn't like the computer side, I knew I would have to work overtime. I guessed you would say it was my lucky and unlucky day. She wore a bun, and her gray and blonde hair was as tight as the smile she gave me when she looked up from her desk. Her eyes washed over me from my head, down to my borrowed suit, to the cheap shoes on my feet. Winnie St. John said, "If you want to keep your job and move up, then don't say too much to Mr. Samsa. He never talks to anyone but me. He doesn't date, especially women working for him. If you do what I tell you, then maybe you can last long enough to make your first paycheck." I nodded. We both wanted that, looking at the work she'd saddled me with. When she walked me to my cubicle, in the large warehouse filled with all kinds of desks and spaces to relax and hide away, I knew this was the place for me, if I could last long enough to enjoy it. Don't get the notion that you'll be here long enough to enjoy this. Remember, you are on probation, and I have the final say, Winnie had said, looking at my face, as if reading my mind as she pointed and smiled at the people walking around with a cup of coffee and power drinks as they glanced at me unconcerned and sat and talked to each other. One of the employees at the bottom of the feeding order came over to my desk when I was a new hire. She'd made an effort to welcome me to the company as she passed during lunch. "Hi. Do you want to go with me to the deli? We can pick up a few things and come back and eat in the cafeteria if you want to, but I go there to have a beer or drink, or we can get a sandwich and salad out of the cafeteria. It's free, but at the deli we have to pay. I go to the deli to get out of here and get fresh air. I don't like sitting with all those rich asshole engineers. Don't get me wrong, we make much more money here and have more freedom, but they have that smug look on their faces as if they know something we don't." I extended my hand to her, because I had been sitting there for hours working, and she was the first person who had acted friendly toward me. "I'm Rachel Legrand." "Nice name." "I'm Lindsay Bell. So what do you say? Lunch?" "I have so much work to do. It will take me all night." That's just like Winnie. That's her way of separating the chaff from the wheat, if you know what I mean. I'm from Iowa, and I know exactly what you mean. My family owns a farm. "Well, what are you doing here?" Lindsay said, leaning on my desk. "I wanted to live a little and see San Francisco," I said to her. "Well, good luck with these high prices and the rent. I'm thinking about going back home." "And where's that?" "Texas. See you after lunch. I'll have a margarita for both of us." She smiled and waved and sashayed away. I watched Lindsay strutting out of the large open room, and as she walked past the office of Mr. Samsa, she glanced over at his shuttered office windows and waited for the elevator to take her down to the first floor. When Lindsay returned from lunch, she had time to give me all the office gossip floating around about Samsa Digital Technologies. I kept an eye on Winnie, who appeared to be more interested in a new hire now that she had given me the once-over and deemed me fit. "Mr. H. Samsa has brothers. Can you believe that?" Lindsay said, raising an eyebrow. She talked a mile a minute, as my mother would say. "And Mr. H, that's Harper between me and you, and don't ever refer to him by his first name. That's rule number 1. He quit school, Stanford, I believe, to run the company when his brother Hunter suddenly left, she said. He's a hardware engineer, whatever that is. I would never refer to him by his first name. Lindsay glanced at me with a raised eyebrow. Well, I would if he looked at me with those large blue eyes. It would have to be in bed, of course, when I called him Harper, 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 she said, leaning over and whispering as if she was having an orgasm. Lindsay gave me a large white-toothed smile and continued with the day's gossip, her long blonde hair whipping back and forth as she talked, and her weighty hips shifting. Well, the company had been handed over to him by his grandfather, Harper, his namesake, and it was only fitting that he run the company. She shrugged, turned, and went back to her desk when she saw someone listening and looking at her. I found out later that he wasn't married, and all the girls have him in their sights. I'm here one day and they tell me to lay off. As if they thought I had a chance to sleep with him, not even date him. I had been doubtful that I would even see him, no less get a chance to tell him I didn't sleep with men on the first date. I thought after careful coaching by Lindsay on what minefields to stay out of. To my surprise, I did see him, and he knew I was alive. It was wishful thinking that I would meet him for the first time, and he would ask me out on a date. If nothing else, I could dream of having the opportunity to refuse an advance from him, knowing full well that if he asked me, I would jump into his bed and give him the best sex of his life. If I knew anything about sex. Being a virgin has its perks, but not with men like that, I thought. We'd finished for the day and Lindsay had long gone, and so had everyone else when I glanced around. I had my purse in hand, and just in case I couldn't get an advance on my paycheck, a pair of sneakers in my bag for walking, but they did give me an advance of my salary, which was a surprise. Who would have thought a company like this would have a heart? I guess I won't need these now, I mumbled, looking at my 6-inch heels and sneakers after Harper had closed the door to his office. I'd treat myself and catch a cab home. I had to get up early and be on time tomorrow. I had a big incentive now that I'd met the handsome, beyond belief, Harper Samsa. The man with the hidden smile. I thought. I wondered what he was hiding behind that memorable face and that fascinating closed smile. Looking at my watch, it was almost 11 o'clock. Where had the time gone? It was too late to meet my friends after work. These were working people and they must be in bed by now. I had planned a big celebration, and I was buying drinks. My first month on the job, I sighed and smiled leaving the office. It had been a hard year graduating from college, and the only saving grace was to make it through this trial period, and I would be able to get my own apartment. Well, maybe. Not quite. I would still need a roommate with the sky-high rent, with speculators buying out all the available apartments. I had my eye on one, but it was so small, and the rent so outrageous, that I didn't think I would ever be able to afford anything but renting a space on my friend's couch. When I looked up, Mr. Samsa was watching me closely through his shuttered windows, and then he closed them. Maybe he was wondering why it was taking me so long to get out of there. I expected security to come up and escort me out at any time. I wanted to give him a piece of my mind, but I didn't dare. Besides, who could stare at a man like that with a face like his and say anything? Gazing up at his unusual hard body made me a blithering idiot when he stood before me. I almost fainted in his arms, and then that would be the end of that, and someone would drag me out to the street and call an ambulance, and then my job would be gone, and I would be homeless on the streets of San Francisco, unable to pay for my place of a couch in a small rooming house. The worst part, I would have to go home to Iowa and help on the farm milking cows or making cheese. The thought made me shudder. I didn't mind milking cows and all the animals. I loved animals. It was the other stuff that put me off, like cleaning barns. This was a step up for me, in every way. Waiting until I heard his door close, and the sound of his shoe leather on polished marble floors, and the elevator open and then close, I picked up my large red coach purse and headed out. When I reached the elevator, I took a hard breath, because this was the first month, and I had gotten through it without being fired. However, the way Mr. Samsa was looking at me without an expression on his face, except the one of displeasure for me working overtime, I could come into work the next morning and that would be it. I would be handed a pink slip and told to pick up my pay, which would be 0, because I had taken an advance on my pay. The idea sickened me, because I could see the snide look and crooked smile on Winnie's face as she handed me the slip. No one would miss me. As I entered the elevator and made it to the lobby, I stepped out of the elevator and saw Harper Samsa standing there with his leather briefcase in hand. I lowered my eyes and walked past him. "Good night, Mr. Samsa," I said in a low, meek voice, like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered and crying for a pardon from the big bad wolf. He looked down at me and then at his watch and said nothing. I walked out of the building, only to see a limo parked out front. My first and only thought was that I had to get home and cry, because he hated me.